When I was 14 years old, I developed an eye problem that resulted in a kind of blurry vision. I think it began with squinting a lot in class.
Compounds can be thought of as replacing one another. The equations for this type of reaction have the general equation AB plus CD yields...
The world around me actually began to look different.
Double replacement reaction. You will observe examples of the 4 types of chemical reactions described here. You will be expected to balance the equation...
Naturally, my mother rushed me to the eye doctor where I underwent all kinds of tests. It was around this time that I entered into what my mother called my rebellious period. Things I had taken for granted, I now began to question. And this eye problem, this blurriness, gave a very weird twist to the world I was growing up in. American suburbia of the 1960s. When I was 9 years old, we moved to a neighborhood called Huntington Valley. Unlike older towns, which evolved slowly, ours was an instant neighborhood, built on what was once farmland. Hundreds of new split-level, colonial, and ranch-style homes, all on identical plots of land, just 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
Wherever you go throughout America today, you will find Americans are building at what almost seems a fever pitch, whole new communities in the restful countrysides.
I remember going to visit the model home with my parents one Sunday afternoon. We were shown catalogs featuring all the different types of houses you could choose from. By the end of the day, we had a down payment on the colonial model. This was going to be our dream house. We moved in the summer of 1961. This is the street that I grew up on, and I haven't been back here in about 20 years. I lived in the house at the very end of the street, and I'd love to show you that house, but unfortunately the present owners are being rather difficult and won't let us film there. But I figure if I can drive by very slowly, maybe you can get a peek. It's right over there. Looks a bit different. The trees have really grown in a lot. I figure maybe since it doesn't look like the owners are home, I can come back with a long lens and we can sneak some shots. My childhood was basically a happy one. I felt very loved and very protected. That was the problem. My life was too protected. It was like I was growing up inside a glass bubble with no connection to the outside world. And this place I was living in gave me an unrealistic idea of what my life would be like when I grew up. It was a world without drama, without adventure, where everything was the same. This year I turned 40, and I decided to go back to Huntington Valley and get in touch with some of my old school friends, women I hadn't seen in many years. I wanted to know how this place and those times shaped who we'd become. I wondered what they thought about growing up in suburbia in the 1960s.
I had a very safe and secure childhood. I didn't know what it was like not having enough food to eat. I always had everything I needed. I always felt like my parents loved me. I felt like I didn't have a worry in the world.
I always thought this would be the kind of place that I would live, that I would have a nice husband and 2 kids and a nice lifestyle, enough money to, you know, do things for my children and for myself.
I was embarrassed about growing up in a suburban development. It was embarrassing to tell people that I came from a place like this, so I sort of invented little stories about how different it was.
We were all white. We were all mostly Jewish. We all came from the same economic level.
The women in the neighborhood didn't work. They stayed home. They took care of their kids. They took care of their homes.
They cooked the meals, they cleaned the house.
My mother's typical day revolved around making sure that my father had his meals.
Seemed like everybody's parents were really happy. Nobody was divorced. Nobody looked like they were going to be divorced.
People in Huntington Valley just didn't get divorced. I remember going to a neighbor's home and seeing that there was beer in the refrigerator. We didn't have beer in our refrigerator growing up. We talked about that for months, that there was actually a six-pack of beer in somebody's refrigerator. It was shocking.
I think the people here aren't shocked as easily these days, but some things still haven't changed. Like the king and queen sculpture that my parents put on our front lawn. The king still has the same smug look on his face. The queen still looks shy and demure, standing behind him, her head lowered. I hated that king and queen and all they represented. And there they stood on my front lawn, 6 feet tall, with plants growing out of their heads. No wonder I spent a lot of time locked in my bedroom. Here, my girlfriends and I created a world of our own. A world that seemed much more exciting to us than the world of our mothers. Or so we thought. We'd spend hours memorizing the lyrics to pop songs and dissecting the most minute tidbit of high school gossip. We were starved for drama in our lives, so we created our own.
I dreamed of him and me, and how it's gonna be. Other fellas call me out for a date, but I just sit and wait. I'd rather concentrate on Johnny Angel.
We were just as bad then, too.
And then that dance show that we were on.
Dancing was a very big part of our life growing
Yeah,
up. I mean,
yeah.
we snuck out to dances that our parents wouldn't let us go to.
Yeah.
On a weekly basis, would get caught, get
Yeah.
punished, and sneak out the next week.
And I watched.
Right, you used to come along to the dance.
I did.
You
I never
dance.
danced.
I
I always
never
was
went
too
with you.
self-conscious.
Did I wasn't
Talk about
there.
peer approval. I always felt like I wasn't coordinated enough. I couldn't dance, so I would watch. I wanted to be part of it, but I never would
Should I
dance.
say this? But I remember when you called yourself Suicidal.
Why did I do that?
Well, we did that when we went dancing on TV on the Joe Niagara show. You were Suicidal, and I was Ivy Rossini. There's no doubt about it.
I don't know.
What would
I
make
guess it does
Suicidal a
sound
better
more
name than
French than Jewish.
so French.
It's not the temperature, it's the tempo that's hot.
Starting from when I was a young teenager, I began fantasizing about being someone else.
Your hat must be in tune with the rest of your costume.
I felt there was something boring about being a suburban girl from Huntington Valley. So I invented new identities for myself.
The show here in Manchester. For a matter of fact, it puts everything in focus. Optical art has spread to the...
I wanted to be anyone but who I was, living anywhere but here.
On a night out with these.
I wanted my life to be an adventure. I guess that's why I became a film director. So I could live out the fantasies of the characters on screen, or better yet, they could live out my fantasies. Moving to New York City, I felt I had finally come to a place where people played out in real life scenarios I had only played out in my imagination. The thing I've always loved about the city was the diversity of people. In this city, you could disappear into a crowd, lead a secret life, or reinvent yourself as the person you really wanted to be. I found this very appealing since I was a suburban girl who did not want to become a suburban housewife.
I liked my parents' lifestyle a lot. I thought my parents lived very well. They had a lot of friends. They were very social. They were well liked. My dad was very respected. My mom was also.
Oh, now I remember in high school, the biggest worry I had was not having frizzy hair. That's all we thought about was how to keep our hair from getting frizzy.
We had a lot of things. It seemed like very conspicuous consumption was going on around us. You know, it was important to have things.
If you had a Cadillac, I mean, Cadillac was the big status symbol if your father drove a Cadillac. If your father was professional, like if he was a doctor.
The house, you know, how nice your house looked, whether you had domestic help, what kind of a car the man of the family drove. That was very important.
My father was a car nut. Second only to his love for his family was his love of cars. And at times it was a pretty close second. Here my younger sister and I are trying to get Dad's attention. Daddy, here we are, Dad, woo! Maybe my brother will have a better shot at it. Whoops. Oh well, I think one of the main reasons we moved to the suburbs was so my dad could have more room to wash his car. Let's face it, suburban culture is definitely car culture. There was no other way to get around. And as the men left in the morning for their jobs in the city, the women spent their days in cars. Big cars that could carry bags of groceries and loads of children, since a woman's day was spent chauffeuring her children and driving to that hub of suburban life, the neighborhood shopping center. This was our instant main street, a strip of stores with a supermarket at one end, surrounded by a huge parking lot. It was at these new supermarkets that the suburban woman got to exert her power.
Those who sell and all who manufacture what is sold know that American women often have the deciding voice in whatever we come to buy. They offer her the romance, the adventure of choosing from foods gathered from the four corners of America, and indeed from all the world, all well lighted for selection, placed where she can reach them, arranged for time-saving as well as money-saving selection. Each producer trying to charm her with choice offerings calculated to please her a little better than with the attractions of anyone else.
But times have changed. This shopping center is no longer the center of activity it was when I was a kid. And I couldn't help but notice the number of old women wandering around. Where were the young suburban women? Were they at work? Or were they shopping at the huge indoor mall just a few miles away? In any case, I couldn't help but think that the young housewives of my youth were now these old women walking around the shopping center that had also grown old.
At the time, growing up in suburbia, women generally didn't work. It was considered, it's just something that women didn't do. And I think that a lot of people looked down on my mother for doing it. The perception was that my father couldn't afford to support his family, and so my mother had to go out and work. And that was sort of looked down upon by the neighbors, I think.
I never thought that I would have to support myself. I don't think that I was raised to think that I would have to support myself.
I was brought up to go to college, find a husband, get married, have children, and live happily ever after. Where, on the other hand, my brother was reading Encyclopedia Britannica at age 3. My parents decided he was going to be a doctor, and in fact, he is now an MD, PhD. But my parents didn't have the same goals for me. I just had to be pretty and personable. But I didn't have to become anything or anyone.
My mother would have been happy if I had married somebody who had supported me so that I wouldn't have to worry about money while I was working on my paintings.
My mother thought that I should get married. As a matter of fact, when I went to college, she bought me a fur coat so I would attract a man. And so I had this beautiful fur coat, and that's what my graduation present was. So when I went to college, I would be attractive to catch a husband.
We were looking for boys. We were always looking for cute boys. We went to the malls and other places from where we lived and looked for the boys who lived near the malls. We were shopping too and eating, but we were looking for boys.
I don't even think we were shopping that much because who had money?
I remember cruising Plymouth Meeting Mall.
Since so much emphasis was put on finding a husband, looking for boys was a major preoccupation.
I went out with Michael Seidelman.
Besides, there wasn't much else to do in suburbia.
Don't you remember? No, I thought everyone knew. Yeah, he was very cute.
Well, we could always go bowling.
We used to go to the bowling alley to cruise for boys. We were so deep. Well, we didn't go to bowl.
This bowling alley closed down last year after 32 years in business. Starting in the mid-70s, kids stopped hanging out at the bowling alley and started going to the new video arcade instead. But back in the 60s, this was the only game in town. Although my girlfriends and I didn't take bowling too seriously, or any sport for that matter. Sports were definitely a male domain. As business slackened off in the early 70s, there was an attempt to liven things up by opening a go-go lounge in the upstairs bar. But that didn't sit too well with the neighborhood. They feared it might attract unruly men, or even worse, wild women.
I think our group of friends were considered pretty wild. Don't you think so, really?
I guess some of us, yeah.
Some of us, sure.
Maybe you and not me.
Thanks.
I don't know. I would have never considered you a bad girl.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I thought I was a good girl, wanting to be a bad girl, but not having the nerve to be a bad girl. I knew I wanted a little excitement, but I never had the nerve to do anything about it. So I tried to get away with as much as I could by still retaining my good girl status.
One thing I've got to say about Ellen, she never lied. Now that I'm older and an honest person, I did lie when I had to when I was a child, but you never did.
Oh, yeah, I lied to my parents all the time.
I
might not
never
have
saw you
lied to...
lying.
I might have not lied to each other. I tried to be honest if my friends asked me what something looked like.
I didn't even think you lied to your parents.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I couldn't tell them half the things that we did.
But we're telling them now, aren't we?
Do you remember shoplifting?
How could I forget? We got caught, didn't we?
Were you a big shoplifter?
The first time I went shoplifting was with Barbara Bookman, and I was holding the curtain for her, so I guess they could call me an accomplice.
I would have died if I ever got caught. I mean, I don't think I could have handled that at all. I was too scared, and I guess I thought that you had a lot of guts. I don't know what I would have called it then, but that you would be able to do it, actually go through with it and not like pass out on the floor.
Did you know at that time that it was wrong? I mean, to me, it was just, I didn't even think about it. I just...
For me, it was an adventure.
Right, we were 13 years old.
I thought of it as a challenge. It was really just to add some excitement to a dull
Definitely.
day.
We were 13.
I think Susan was always wild. The teachers in school thought that she was wild. Our parents did too. And I guess we knew...
I don't think my parents ever thought that Sue was
No.
wild.
Oh, mine did.
There were times in our relationship that my parents wouldn't allow me to be friendly with Susan anymore. I don't know what activity we got into, but they had had enough. And I think they must have said it several times. That's it, you cannot be friendly with Susan anymore.
But I think inside we knew that there was something else there besides just like rebelling and being bad, that there was creative stuff going on.
It didn't take much to be labeled a bad girl in Huntington Valley. And my offenses were actually pretty minor. But it was around this time that I developed an infatuation with a mild form of badness that has stayed with me ever since. But the really bad girls were the tough Italian girls that lived in the neighborhood on the other side of the shopping center. I thought they were the coolest girls in the world. Obviously, the feeling wasn't mutual. Actually, I was kind of proud I could hold my own, despite a few bruises. And it was from this time on that bad girls became my heroes.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, you're out of here.
It's about time.
Don't talk to me about cooking.
She's just like you, Dino. She's just like you.
She's not like me.
Well, she's certainly not like my family. There's never been anybody like her in my family.
I'm not saying that.
From the very beginning, she hit kids on the playground. Where did she get that from? Not from my family. Certainly, I never hit any kids on the playground.
But all.
I always kept clean on the playground. She was always dirty.
But all.
I had 12 pins for deportment when I was in school, Dino. The nuns just loved me.
I was brought up to be a good girl. This is me at age 4, practicing the ladylike way to sit on a sofa. But it was hard work to be a successful good girl, since there was a long list of do's and don'ts. We were encouraged to be appealingly feminine, but not go so far as to be labeled a tramp. For a young girl, this was sometimes confusing, since there was a fine line between a beauty queen and a bunny. It was our job to flaunt what nature had given us, or to enhance where nature had failed.
I remember my mother's bras back then because there were bras that had these bones, these plastic ribbing all around it, and it was like a cage that your body was encased in. And the
Long
thought, I mean,
line.
a long line ribbed casing. And, you know, and I can remember my mother taking off her bras, and she'd have, like, indents.
Right, my mother
all
did too.
around her midriff from being, you know, held in for,
She
you
wore
know,
that
10
every
hours.
day?
She wore it every day, yeah.
Well, they didn't have pantyhose when we were in elementary school. So in order to keep our stockings up, I wore a long-legged girdle. So there I was trotting off to elementary school in a girdle. In a full long girdle. But my mother bought it for me. I mean, I'm sure I didn't say, hey, Mom, let's go buy a girdle, you know.
You know what it was? It was like you, and I did the same thing with my mother influenced my style of dressing. My mother wore padded bras and girdles, and so did I. In fact, I even had a bubble. At least you escaped that.
A what?
I had a bubble hairstyle.
Oh, a bubble.
At
Oh,
least
that's right,
she
you
escaped
did.
that.
Back in the 60s, the hairstyles that were popular required a lot of heavy maintenance. So the shopping center beauty parlor became the prime meeting spot for the neighborhood women. I think for many women, going to the beauty parlor was a ritual that took on an almost religious significance. I remember I would sometimes tag along with my mother, and I was always intrigued by the look of the beauty parlor because it was always like really pink, and it smelled like hairspray and lacquer. And it was a place where all these like mysterious beauty rituals took place. You know, the women would come in looking one way, and then they would walk out transformed. But achieving that transformation demanded hours of serious commitment. And the choices were endless. You could bleach it, perm it, strip it, dye it, wave it, frost it, streak it. It was a woman's job to be beautiful. After all, she was defined by how she looked.
Some women are born beautiful. They make it look easy. But most women have to put a little time and effort into their appearance. And then there are those of us who need all the help we can get. Like me.
When we were in high school, Twiggy was the beauty symbol. It was very unfortunate because I was growing up with a lot of curves, and Twiggy was the, you know, straight, skinny model who sort of set the standards for us. And if you fell in those standards, then you were beautiful, and if you didn't, then you were a little abnormal. So we were all aspiring to be Twiggies with big eyes and flat chests.
I remember, like, when I was a teenager, my mother, at age 13, took me to the diet doctor, and that was, like, the beginning of the end. I was hooked on diet pills for, like, until I got to college.
I never knew that, Brenda.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I had to take them at one point, like, to wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
But, yeah, but anyway,
your mother was so obsessed
my mother
with you
was
being
totally
thin?
obsessed with me being thin, and then I became totally obsessed
It's
with
only been in this century, in the last part, that thinness has come into style. Women have always been bigger.
Yeah, but regular, your family doctor would easily give you diet pills. And
One
even
of-
when you were a
right.
kid,
One of
you
our
know,
friends-
15-year-old kids were hooked on diet pills.
Back then, I had no idea that I was getting addicted to speed. And it was only in college, when everyone was knocking at my door, that I realized that I was a speed freak.
Nothing else mattered. I mean, it didn't matter if I got good grades. It didn't matter. Nothing else really mattered personally on a personal level unless I was, like, Twiggy. And I got there. I don't know if you guys remember, but I was, like Twiggy for about a day.
I think because of this obsession with thinness, for many women, eating became a subversive activity.
Try one.
Allowing yourself to eat was an act of rebellion. I wonder why food makes me think of marriage.
I met my husband, and 10 months later we were getting married, and I wanted to feel safe, and being married meant being safe and protected and taken care of. But I don't think I knew him well enough.
I think my marriage is a lot different than what I thought marriage would be when I was thinking about it as a young girl. But I love my marriage. I'm very happy with my marriage. I love the difference.
My parents, on the surface, looked like they had a really happy marriage. But underneath and living in the house, I knew that there was something wrong, and I didn't know exactly what it was. It ended up that my parents got divorced right after I went away to college, but they stayed together for the sake of the kids, because that was expected in those days, that parents wouldn't get divorced. I got married to someone, and I was going to make it work. I was not going to get divorced. It was very important for me to not have that, to not get divorced. And the harder I tried not to do it, the more it created that same situation for myself. So I ended up divorced too.
Getting married was one of my goals until I actually took the old step-a-rooney to the altar. My ex-husband is somebody who I still love and admire and respect. When we separated from each other, I did not feel like I was a failure, but I remember having this little thought in my mind. I kind of knew that I wasn't cut out for marriage.
I too wasn't cut out for marriage, at least not in the official sense, which was probably my reaction to growing up in a world where having a marriage certificate was the ultimate goal of a woman's life. And frankly, this obsession with marriage made me more than a little bit skeptical. I've always liked women with a bit of guts, which is why I like old B movies. While the good girls were home caring for their leading men, the B movie bad girls were out on an adventure. So what if they got a bullet in the heart or ended up in jail? At least they got to have some fun. I loved going to the drive-in movies when I was a kid. I remember my father and my mother would pile the 3 kids into the family car. We'd be in our pajamas and we'd bring along our pillows. And then we'd head off to a B-movie double feature. I remember one of the movies would often be like about a juvenile delinquent motorcycle gang, and the other would be some sort of low-budget Japanese Godzilla movie, usually badly dubbed into English. But I think those were among my favorites.
I remember going to the drive-in and not telling your parents that you were going to the drive-in because they would know that the reason you were going to the drive-in was to make out. But I do remember going, and that's what we did. We made out, and then you would get up and go get something to eat, and then you'd come back and steam up the windows.
Which brings us to sex.
Garcia.
I waited up for you.
It wasn't necessary, Garcia. You may go to bed now. You'll be all right. Yes, ma'am.
Did you care for a drink?
I want.
As a teenager, sex was on everybody's mind. I know it was on mine. Only girls weren't supposed to admit it.
Buenas noches.
You must lead a very glamorous life, Mary.
I suppose so, Bob, but sometimes sitting here, day after day, banging away at my keyboard, writing can be so lonely.
As good girls, we were encouraged to flirt and charm.
I guess you've got to have a very vivid imagination to write these romance novels, don't you?
But where was all this flirting supposed to lead?
Yes, I do.
Certainly not to sex.
But I also do a lot of research.
It was our job to put a halt to such things, not to enjoy it, and certainly not to initiate it.
I do remember feeling like never sure how far it was okay to go and not okay to go, and how long you were supposed to be going out with somebody before you let them touch you here or there,
Oh, that's right. In high school, back in those days, didn't we talk about bases? Wasn't there first base?
Absolutely. First base, second base, third base.
And
all
run.
the way.
Right.
Girls that went to first base were okay. Girls that went, and I guess everybody knows first base is kissing, right? Or, I don't know, second base is touching your boobs, and third base was touching your crotch, and I guess all the way meant that you fucked. So we didn't know too many. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of girls going all the way that we didn't know about. Like, a lot of the girls in school that looked like good girls probably were very bad.
I lost my virginity when I was like 13 years old. But, see now, okay, now I'm embarrassed. Okay, but it was just like one of those one-shot deals. My boyfriend and I were just kind of experimenting. We didn't really know what we were doing. But then it wasn't until many years later that I actually engaged in sex. But I didn't tell any of my friends about it. I was embarrassed. I started to tell one of my friends, but she was so appalled that I had to lie to her and say, hey, I just made it up. I couldn't admit to it.
G-G-O-O, go, go! D-G-O-O! D-G-O-O, go, go! D-G-O-O! D-G-O-O, go, go!
This is my old high school. I remember being very proud to go here, since the school seemed so modern at the time. But I'm sorry I didn't take school more seriously. I was smart enough to get by without studying, but I now regret all the things I never bothered to learn.
I felt like being smart sometimes was a detriment. People weren't real impressed with your brain, and certainly not boys. They didn't want you to be smarter than they were. And so sometimes I felt like being smart was something I wanted to keep hidden.
I would stare up at the clock, waiting for the bell to ring, looking forward to those few minutes of gossip in the hallways in between classes. But the real hot spot was the girls' bathroom, especially after lunch. The popular girls would take up positions in front of the mirrors to check their makeup and fuss with their hair. The smokers would be tucked away in the stalls, sneaking a forbidden puff. And you just might find me over in the corner, studying for that chemistry test I had forgotten about the night before.
Since the high school was large, it was made up of many distinct neighborhoods, and there were many different social cliques. I remember that each of the cliques had their own area in the cafeteria. It was like the smart kids would sit at one table, and it was always the same table. The greasers or the tough kids would sit at another table.
There was a specific area for the rah-rahs. Those were the kids with school spirit, like the cheerleaders and the student council members. There was another area for the conservatives, the jives, the smoothies, the jocks. The black kids sat in a certain area, as did the Jewish kids. So you were pretty much defined by where you sat during lunch.
I really don't remember any mixing of the races in high school. I didn't have any black friends in high school. I knew some black students, and we would say hello to each other, but I really had no close social contact with any black people other than a woman who worked for our family. She was really the only black person that I knew.
When we were seniors, the musical was West Side Story, and the Sharks were black. They weren't Puerto Rican, they were black, and the Jets were white, except for Maria. So that they still couldn't have her be a black girl and him be a white guy.
Well, there were some girls in high school that went out with black guys, and it was sort of unusual, but we thought it was, the ones who were doing it we thought were really cool.
8 inches. 9 inches.
1969 was the year I graduated from high school.
7 inches.
It was also the last year of the school dress code.
9.5 inches.
There were now a lot more serious issues to contend with than the length of our skirts. The world was changing, and it was happening very fast.
My childhood was so secure and so safe, I felt like my parents could take care of anything. I didn't have to worry about anything. I knew that my parents could take care of it. I knew that my life was perfect, really. All I thought about was having a good time. But then my boyfriend in high school was drafted, and he went to Vietnam, and his father called me up one day and told me that he was killed. And I think that changed my life more than anything. I think that's when I first started thinking.
The summer after I graduated from high school was also the summer of the Woodstock Music Festival. But in Huntington Valley, it will be remembered as the summer of Margie's infamous party. You see, Margie's mother had suddenly gotten divorced and was now spending less time at home. So Margie threw a big open house and invited both black and white kids. The music was loud, the neighbors were appalled, and the police were called in. This would be my last summer in Huntington Valley. I was about to enter the real world.
We grew up with a certain set of rules. You acted a certain way, you looked a certain way, and then all of a sudden, everything changed, all the rules changed.
That's when I remember bra burning and marches, and I forget, like Earth Day, and we went to Washington, and I don't even know who we were marching for, but we all had to go to Washington, D.C. to march about something. Do you remember?
I didn't go to college with you. I
No.
went to college with Ellen.
That's right, but I mean, everybody went to Washington to march about something. And
We didn't. We weren't socially conscious.
Looking back at my childhood, I see that I was very lucky, but I wasn't really getting a true glimpse of what was going to be happening once I hit the pavement, once I found out what was really happening in the world. You have to work hard. People aren't always going to do what you want them to do. I found out that life is a lot harder than I ever imagined that it would be.
My life hasn't turned out even a little bit like I thought it would. I'm divorced. I have 2 kids that I take care of and support, and I have to work. I work very long hours, 12 and 13-hour days sometimes, and it was never anything I thought I would be doing.
I've been married 14 years to the same guy, and we've just decided not to have children. We just are choosing not to have a family. which is very disappointing to my mother.
I've been working as a waitress since 1972, so I would have time to work on my paintings, and I feel like it's made me a stronger person. I was a mean-spoiled, fat little kid. And now I'm a free spirit.
I never thought that I would be a spiritual person. I never thought that I would really, really like being a mother. I'm sort of happy on many different levels, and I never thought that I would be.
There's this one last story about the neighborhood, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I kind of like to believe that it really happened. It seems that a couple of guys at this bar over here bet this woman $100 that she wouldn't have the guts to walk home naked. And she took them on.
It's been 20 years since I left Huntington Valley for New York City. And after my family moved away, I never thought I'd be back here, let alone to make a film. It's funny the direction your life takes, the way things circle back around. Like 25 years ago today, I was probably riding down this very same street with my girlfriends in the back seat instead of a camera crew. And we were probably heading up to the shopping center to cruise for boys.